When I first set eyes on the pristine cul-de-sac of Clearwood Grove, I thought I'd found the perfect place to settle down. It was a classic American suburb, large, single-family homes with neatly trimmed lawns, dog walkers greeting neighbors under leafy oak trees, and a homeowners association, HOA, that prided itself on maintaining a tidy neighborhood standard. My job, though none of my neighbors knew, was as the chief of anti-corruption enforcement in our state's Department of Justice. I preferred to keep a low profile. After years of leading complex investigations into bribery and abuse of power, I had learned that letting people underestimate me was an invaluable advantage. The house I purchased was a charming, craftsman-style dwelling at the far end of the cul-de-sac. It had a wide front porch, a bright green lawn, and just enough backyard space for me to entertain friends on weekends. The neighbors seemed pleasant and welcoming. I quickly learned that the HOA was chaired by an older gentleman named Mr. Wagner, who was retiring from community leadership in a few months. His second-in-command, though, was a middle-aged woman named Andrea Whitmore. Everyone addressed Andrea politely in public, but behind closed doors, and well out of her earshot, they referred to her as Karen. Even Mr. Wagner seemed reluctant to challenge her. Standing at about 5'5", Andrea wore meticulously pressed linen outfits and carried herself with an air of unshakable self-righteousness. Her short, styled hair and steely, deep-set eyes accented a stern expression that rarely softened, even when she smiled. I soon discovered that Andrea, Karen, had a knack for rules and regulations. She relished citing the most arcane of HOA bylaws, from the accepted colors of fence paint to the permissible hours for lawn mowing. On my move-in day, she marched across my driveway to point out, in her crisp, authoritarian voice, that the moving truck exceeded the allowable length on public roads per the HOA's guidelines. She actually threatened to fine me for it. I chuckled it off at the time, politely promising to comply and figuring it was some overblown welcome ritual. Little did I know it was the tip of a very large iceberg. Karen's enforcement style was more than enthusiastic micromanagement. It was a quest for absolute power over every aspect of our daily lives. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my routine. During the day, I'd head downtown to my office, unmarked, to maintain a discreet presence, where I directed a specialized team investigating bribery cases involving local officials. By evening, I was just another suburban homeowner, weeding my flower bed or grilling burgers on the back patio. Occasionally, I'd cross paths with Karen, who would deliver a pointed reminder to keep my recycling bin perfectly aligned with the curb or ensure my porch light bulb matched the neighborhood standard. All of this, in hindsight, foreshadowed the drastic lengths she'd go to in order to assert her dominance. Because Karen didn't just want a tidy neighborhood, she wanted total control. In time, she would forge alliances with unscrupulous city inspectors, manipulate building codes, and bribe corrupt officials. And when all else failed, she would try to demolish my home, seeing me as an obstacle to her bigger plans. But Karen had chosen the worst possible target. She had no idea who I was or the resources I had at my disposal. In Clearwood Grove, we were about to find out what happens when an HOA enforcer with no moral compass collides with the chief of the state's anti-corruption unit. It didn't take long for me to notice that Andrea Whitmore, our self-appointed Karen, had bigger ambitions than handing out petty violation slips. Whenever I drove home from work, I'd see her stepping out of mysterious black sedans parked on the street, talking to men in suits with city badges. Other times, I'd catch fleeting glimpses of her standing on the sidewalk with her phone camera raised, surreptitiously snapping photos of people's houses. During the monthly HOA meeting at the local elementary school's auditorium, Karen was the de facto leader of the discussion, even though Mr. Wagner still officially chaired. She commandeered the microphone, rattling off proposals to update and modernize Clearwood Grove. She insisted we needed more uniform fences, ideally a single style and color. She wanted to expand the sidewalk in certain areas, requiring homeowners to surrender parts of their front yards. She proposed a new community clubhouse with strict membership guidelines for residents who maintain the highest standards. While some neighbors nodded in approval, likely out of fear, others whispered disapproval. I overheard a retired couple, the Melbournes, grumbling that they didn't want to tear down their beloved white picket fence just to appease an HOA tyranny. A younger family, the Jasons, lamented the cost of redoing their fence to a uniform style. But whenever anyone voiced dissent publicly, Karen glared them into silence or challenged them on neglecting community values. The seeds of conflict were planted. I began quietly gathering information, not just as a neighbor tired of petty demands, but in my professional capacity as someone who recognized warning signs of corruption. I looked into city ordinances, building permit records, and the local civil code. If Karen was indeed forging a plan to push neighbors out or exploit certain regulations, I wanted tangible proof. My instincts told me she wasn't working alone. She had too much confidence in her ability to push new regulations through. Perhaps she'd made inroads with local zoning board members or city inspectors. I had, on more than one occasion, encountered crooked building inspectors who accepted kickbacks in exchange for favorable reports. My job rarely took me to the smaller suburbs, but I'd kept an ear to the ground about suspicious patterns. One afternoon, I returned home to find a bright orange "Stop Work" notice stuck to my front door. Confused, I examined it. It accused me of performing unauthorized structural additions. That was baffling. I hadn't changed anything about the house since I moved in. The notice cited city building code violations, along with a fine of $500 if not resolved within a week. As I peeled the notice off, my phone rang. It was Karen, calling to explain that she'd been forced to alert the city about a dangerous deck modification. When I demanded to know what on earth she was talking about, she calmly insisted that I must have added new support beams to my back deck or risked it collapsing. "We must ensure the safety of our community," she said. I marched into my backyard. The deck was exactly as it had been. No new beams, no modifications, certainly nothing dangerous. It dawned on me that Karen had orchestrated this phony violation to see if she could leverage the city's inspection arm against me. I kept my cool, told Karen that I would address the issue promptly, and hung up. In reality, I called a trusted colleague in the building department, discreetly asked him to check the permit logs, and as I expected, no official complaint had been registered with the city. This "stop work" order was likely phony. It was a small skirmish, but it revealed Karen's modus operandi. She was testing how much I'd push back. She had no idea that behind my neighborly facade stood the state's top anti-corruption officer. So I let her think I was rattled and began preparing for a deeper investigation into her real agenda. I had a personal rule when investigating corruption: never assume coincidences. Karen's petty harassment, the questionable city notices, and her frequent meetings with unknown officials formed a pattern. If she had indeed bribed local authorities to do her bidding, she'd leave a paper trail somewhere. Maybe not in plain sight, but an operation that big required documents, text messages, and financial transactions. For the next month, I observed carefully. On Friday mornings, a black SUV often showed up in front of Karen's house. A tall, gray-haired man in a rumpled suit would go inside for about half an hour, then leave. On one occasion, I recognized the city crest on his folder when he got back into his car. I snapped a few discreet phone photos, capturing the license plate. Back in my office, I ran the plate through a confidential database, verifying that the vehicle was registered to a so-called independent contractor who'd done sporadic work for the city's Department of Zoning and Land Management. Meanwhile, Karen intensified her attempts to corner me with false HOA violations. She sent letters demanding I repaint my porch steps or remove a non-regulation mailbox post. Each time, I responded politely, ensuring a minimal paper trail that read as though I was just another homeowner trying to comply. In truth, I was building a dossier on her intimidation tactics. Beyond my own case, I spoke quietly with neighbors about their experiences. Many had stories of suspicious city inspections, sudden spikes in property taxes, or threatened fines for unauthorized structures. Some suspected Karen was in cahoots with city staff to bully people into compliance. Others worried she aimed to reduce property values for certain homes, snapping them up cheaply for herself or her associates. There was no single, direct piece of proof, but the pattern was too extensive to ignore. One evening, Ms. Delgado, an older widow who'd lived in Clearwood Grove for decades, confided that Karen once threatened to have her porch declared a fire hazard unless Ms. Delgado supported a special HOA levy for the new community clubhouse. Ms. Delgado had paid a small bribe, cash in an envelope slid under Karen's office door in the local HOA building. She hated herself for it, but at the time, she feared the alternative, a forced porch demolition and a massive city fine she couldn't afford. As Ms. Delgado spoke, her eyes brimmed with tears. I assured her that no one, especially not Karen, had the right to coerce money from her under false pretenses. But Ms. Delgado only shook her head. You don't understand. Karen knows people. She says she can demolish any structure in this neighborhood, all with a single phone call. I can't risk my home. That was the tipping point. Karen's meddling was no longer just an overreaching neighbor. She was colluding with unscrupulous officials to extort and threaten. I'd seen enough to suspect large-scale corruption. So I brought my concerns to my specialized legal team at the Department of Justice. Only the senior attorneys who could be trusted with covert investigations. We launched a discreet probe, pulling city contracting records, cross-referencing them with known associates of Karen, and looking for unusual payments or property transfers. Soon, it became clear Karen was more than just an HOA busybody. She and her city connections were involved in a well-oiled network that traded bribes for building condemnations, forced demolitions, and code violations. All that remained was to catch them in the act, and that opportunity came more swiftly than I anticipated. One crisp autumn morning, I discovered a plain white envelope tucked beneath my welcome mat. The address line simply read my name, no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper with a short message scrawled in neat, slanted handwriting. You've drawn the attention of powerful people. The next time you cross them, you'll lose your house. Be smart. Leave Clearwood Grove before it's too late. No signature. No further information. But I could guess where it came from. Karen, or one of her accomplices, had decided to escalate their intimidation. Perhaps they sensed I wasn't the meek resident they'd hoped to bully into submission. I kept the note, carefully bagging it as evidence. A fingerprint analysis might be inconclusive, but it was worth trying. Later that day, I overheard Karen laughing in her driveway with the tall man from the black SUV. She wore a self-satisfied smirk that made me suspect she was behind that cryptic threat. After all, Ms. Delgado had heard Karen boast about demolishing homes. I was probably next on her list. Rather than panic, I saw this as a sign that my infiltration was working. Their desperation meant I was close to uncovering the full scope of their scheme. But I also realized I had to be cautious. Bribery and financial manipulation were one thing. Outright destruction of someone's home was a more extreme measure. If Karen was indeed bribing city officials, they might be bold enough to push through an illegal demolition order. In consultation with my senior legal counsel, we began setting up a sting operation. Our plan was multifaceted. Document all communications. Every letter, phone message, or email from Karen or her suspected contacts was meticulously recorded. Covert surveillance. We placed discreet watchers near Karen's house and the suspect city officials' offices, noting who visited whom and when. Financial tracing. Bank transactions of both Karen and her known partners were being monitored through official warrants, searching for bribe money or suspicious cash deposits. Preparedness for a demolition attempt. We alerted certain honest city inspectors about potential anomalies in Clearwood Grove's demolition orders. If a suspicious order came through, we'd be notified immediately. The final piece would be to lure Karen into making a direct attempt on my property. If she tried, we'd have all the evidence needed to arrest her and her co-conspirators. I felt a pang of guilt about letting them possibly damage my home, but I was confident we could intervene before any real destruction occurred. In an ideal world, we'd catch them handing over bribe money or signing a forged demolition permit. Unwittingly, Karen made it easier for us. She began dropping broad hints about big developments in Clearwood Grove that would reshape the entire look of the neighborhood. She wanted to rid the area of unsightly houses not in compliance. Several neighbors told me she singled out mine as a prime candidate for condemnation, claiming my foundation was structurally unsound. Of course, that was nonsense. I'd had a thorough inspection prior to buying. But that lie gave her the pretext she needed. Time was ticking. I prepared my home security cameras, arranged for a quick reaction team from the DOJ, and waited. Karen would make her move soon. Her threats weren't idle. She was about to find out, though, that the line she was crossing led straight into a net of federal and state prosecutors more than ready to charge her. Sure enough, 2 weeks after the anonymous threat letter, Karen announced at an HOA board meeting that a major renovation project was slated for Clearwood Grove, one that would enhance safety and aesthetics. Mr. Wagner, the retiring HOA chair, looked befuddled as she commandeered the microphone. She presented it as a done deal, flaunting official-looking documents that supposedly authorized widespread structural updates across the neighborhood. Several homes in Clearwood Grove have structural vulnerabilities, Karen proclaimed. It's our responsibility to act swiftly. Neglected properties will be subject to mandatory reconstruction or, if necessary, demolition. All for the good of our community. A ripple of alarm spread through the assembled residents. People murmured concerns about the cost, the timeline, and the suspicious suddenness of this plan. Karen's eyes gleamed with triumph as she produced a typed list, naming a handful of houses she claimed needed immediate evaluation. Mine was at the top. When neighbors pressed for clarity, where exactly did these official orders come from? Karen offered only vague references to experts from the city who had documented extensive code violations. She never named the so-called experts, nor provided a legitimate city contact. Nonetheless, some folks were too intimidated to challenge her. I, on the other hand, feigned mild surprise and concern. I stood up, carefully speaking in an even tone, and asked, "Ms. Whitmore, can you clarify who from the city declared my home structurally unsound? My last inspection was perfect." Karen's lips curled into a tight smile. "I'm afraid we can't divulge personal information about city officials. We must respect their privacy." Respect their privacy? That was a comical excuse. I nodded, as though acquiescing, and made a show of asking no further questions. Inside, though, I knew this was the final piece. Karen was about to launch a demolition attempt under false pretenses, orchestrating the entire process from behind the scenes. After the meeting, a few concerned neighbors approached me. The Melbournes looked frantic, worried that Karen might add their older Victorian house to the demolition list next. Ms. Delgado hung in the background, twisting her hands nervously, perhaps wondering if her hush-money bribes had done any good. All I could do was reassure them quietly that justice would soon be served, though I couldn't reveal the details of my investigation. I returned home and immediately contacted my team. We expected Karen or her bribed officials to file official demolition papers soon. If they tried forging city documents, we'd be ready. If a construction crew arrived without legitimate permits, we'd intervene. This was shaping up to be the perfect sting. We'd catch them in the act of demolishing an innocent homeowner's property. And once they set foot on my land with heavy machinery, our cameras, plus local law enforcement, who we tipped off, would do the rest. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in Clearwood Grove turned tense. People whispered about the rumored demolitions whenever they gathered, on sidewalks and driveways, at the local grocery store. Karen was seen prancing around with a newfound air of authority, occasionally accompanied by that tall, gray-haired contractor from the city. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed she was just exercising her HOA duties aggressively. But I knew from experience that behind her inflated bravado was a network of bribes. My quiet investigation had revealed how she paid off certain city staffers to authenticate nonsense reports, while a pair of unscrupulous building inspectors declared select homes unfit. My personal daily routine changed accordingly. I spent less time in my DOJ office, working more from home under the guise of telecommuting. In reality, I was coordinating with the local district attorney's office, my internal affairs unit, and a small circle of trusted investigators. We had to ensure that the local police didn't unwittingly sabotage the sting by responding too soon if Karen's demolition crew arrived. Everyone was on high alert, waiting for the moment Karen triggered the final chain of events. Late one Thursday evening, I was trimming the hedges in my front yard when Karen sauntered past. She had that smug glint in her eye. "I hope you're enjoying your home while it lasts," she remarked in a casual tone. "We'll be making some big changes around here next week." "Big changes, huh?" I said, feigning ignorance. "Like what?" She laughed softly, then lowered her voice. "Oh, you'll see. Let's just say we're turning Clearwood Grove into the most exclusive neighborhood in the state. Homes like yours, with questionable structural integrity, won't cut it anymore. Don't worry, though. Maybe you can rebuild to our standards. If you can afford it." I forced a tight smile and nodded. "Thanks for the heads up." Inside, my heart pounded. Karen was basically announcing that the demolition order was imminent. The next phase was to be ready for that phone call, the one that told me a bulldozer was about to roll up to my doorstep. My team double-checked our gear, body cams, official warrants sealed until the last moment, law enforcement staging areas just outside the neighborhood. I even installed extra security cameras in my front yard, disguised as part of the porch decor, to capture every angle of the upcoming fiasco. This was the calm before the storm. Judging by Karen's confidence, she expected to steamroll me with no resistance, just as she'd done with a few other unlucky residents. But I wasn't some hapless homeowner. I was the chief of anti-corruption enforcement, armed with legal authority and an entire squad trained in covert operations. Karen had no idea that the house she was about to bulldoze was wired with enough surveillance to incriminate her entire ring. I forced myself to remain patient. All the legal prerequisites were in place. Next, we needed her to take that final step, signing or forging the demolition order, bribing the right people, and crossing the line that would put her behind bars. Early the following Wednesday morning, I woke to the rumble of heavy machinery. Pushing aside my bedroom curtains, I spotted a battered orange excavator inching its way down the street, accompanied by a dump truck and 2 pickup trucks. They came to a halt in front of my driveway. Workers in neon vests jumped out, talking animatedly as they studied a clipboard. My phone buzzed almost immediately. One of my watchers, stationed discreetly at the entrance to Clearwood Grove, confirmed that the vehicles had come straight from a local contractor known to have city connections. The watchers also noted a black sedan with tinted windows idling a short distance away. Inside it sat the tall, gray-haired city contractor I'd identified, likely orchestrating the show. Karen herself was nowhere in sight yet, but I had no doubt she was pulling the strings. I calmly changed into casual clothes, then stepped outside, acting as though I were a clueless homeowner. "Can I help you?" I asked the man who appeared to be the construction foreman. He glanced up, looking a bit startled that I'd greeted him. "We've got an order from the city to demolish this property," he said gruffly. "Says here the structure is unsafe. Work's supposed to start today." I feigned outrage. "That's impossible. I never signed off on any demolition. Where's the official permit?" He handed me a document that bore a suspicious city seal and a forged signature from a zoning commissioner. I pretended to study it, allowing enough time for my hidden cameras to capture every detail. Meanwhile, I noticed 2 men in suits, clearly city officials, standing off to the side, whispering to each other. This was it, the perfect sting scenario. "That signature is invalid," I stated, handing the paper back. "I can prove this house is perfectly sound. You can't just tear it down." The foreman gave a shrug. "Look, we get paid to do the job, not to ask questions. If you got a problem, take it up with your city council. We're starting in 15 minutes if you don't move your car." I pretended to panic, stepping back inside. That's when I triggered the plan. I dialed the special phone line to my anti-corruption unit, uttered a single code phrase confirming that the criminals were on site and proceeding with the demolition. Within minutes, a wave of unmarked police cars and official vehicles descended upon Clearwood Grove, quietly setting up around the corner. As the construction crew prepared to angle the excavator's bucket toward my garage, I saw Karen appear at the far end of the street, stepping out of a shiny black SUV. She was talking excitedly on her phone, probably finalizing the bribe payments or making sure everything was going smoothly. The tall, gray-haired contractor emerged from his sedan, waving her over to show that demolition was imminent. My heart pounded with a mix of excitement and relief. This was it. All the puzzle pieces were in place. The moment they broke ground on my property, they'd crossed the final line from conspiracy to active criminal damage, and I had all the legal authority I needed to arrest them. Karen, brimming with arrogant pride, was seconds away from discovering the truth about me. The foreman barked orders to his team. One worker started the excavator's engine, the machine roaring to life. Another worker unspooled a chain, presumably to yank off the front door. Everything was set for an illegal demolition that they believed was sanctioned. Meanwhile, the suits from the city hovered nearby, exchanging glances that betrayed a hint of nerves. I stepped out onto the porch, a phone in my hand, calmly announcing that the city had made a grave mistake and that no one was allowed to damage my property. Karen, standing a few houses away, smirked and crossed her arms. "You're wasting your breath," she called out. "The order is legal and final. At that moment, a caravan of unmarked vehicles roared into view. Out streamed uniformed police officers, along with my close colleagues from the Department of Justice, badges displayed. My neighbor across the street, Ms. Delgado, gasped from her porch. Others peered through windows, eyes wide with confusion or relief. One lead officer shouted, "Stop! Turn off the machinery immediately." The excavator's operator hesitated, glancing at the foreman, who frantically waved for him to comply. The engine died down, leaving an abrupt, tense silence. Karen, for the first time in my experience, seemed unsure of herself. She stormed forward, addressing the officer with venom. "Who gave you the authority to interrupt a city-sanctioned demolition? This is official business." The officer, Lieutenant Samuels, showed his badge. "We're with the state's anti-corruption task force. We have reason to believe this demolition order is fraudulent." Karen's eyes darted to me. I walked up calmly, flipping open my own identification. "I'm the Chief of Anti-Corruption Enforcement," I said, letting each word sink in. "We've documented evidence that you, Ms. Whitmore, have colluded with corrupt city officials to issue illegal permits and conduct demolitions on homes under false pretenses." Karen paled, then attempted a derisive laugh. "What? That's ridiculous. You're just a homeowner. You can't be some official." I raised an eyebrow. "I've been in this position for over a decade. All that time, I've been investigating networks of bribery and abuse of power. And now, you've given me enough proof to arrest the entire operation." A wave of officers fanned out, approaching the gray-haired contractor and the other officials, reading them their rights. A couple of them tried to bolt, but were quickly subdued. Tools, documents, and phones were confiscated. Karen whirled, searching for an escape route, but found herself cornered by the uniformed police. Her expression was a mixture of shock, rage, and dawning horror as the reality of her situation settled in. "Wait," she shrieked. "You can't do this. I'm the vice chair of the HOA. I was protecting the neighborhood. They told me these houses were unsafe." Lieutenant Samuels calmly placed her in handcuffs. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." She struggled, face contorting. "This is a setup. I have money. I can pay." She stopped herself mid-sentence, realizing she was effectively offering a bribe right there in front of half a dozen law enforcement personnel. A hush fell over the entire cul-de-sac. Neighbors gawked, some stepping out onto their lawns for a better view. The bribe money she'd offered to city inspectors, the intimidation tactics, and the forged demolition orders had all been meticulously documented, cross-referenced, and videotaped. There would be no escape from justice. As Karen stood there, cuffed and trembling, I met her gaze and spoke quietly. "You tried to demolish my home, hoping to chase me away from Clearwood Grove. But you never asked what I really do for a living. This entire operation has been monitored from day one. If there's any comfort for you, it's that bribery and property damage are only part of the charges you'll face. Extortion, conspiracy, and corruption are also on that list." She opened her mouth, perhaps to retort, but no words came out. Then the officers led her toward one of the unmarked cars, followed by her co-conspirators. The air felt lighter, as though a storm cloud had finally dispersed. Ms. Delgado wiped tears from her eyes, while other neighbors whispered relieved comments, stunned to witness the downfall of the woman who had terrorized them for so long. In the wake of the arrests, the scene in Clearwood Grove resembled a major criminal bust. Police vehicles lined the street, lights flashing against the tidy suburban backdrop. The local news vans arrived not long after, capturing footage of Karen and her accomplices being taken into custody. Reporters scrambled to interview residents and officials. I gave a brief statement to the press, primarily confirming that the Department of Justice had carried out an anti-corruption operation involving fraudulent demolition permits. I kept personal details vague, though word quickly spread among neighbors that I was more than just a typical homeowner. Some residents looked at me with awe or even mild mistrust, unsure if I'd been spying on them all along. But most expressed relief, even gratitude. Ms. Delgado approached me with trembling hands, thanking me for stopping Karen and putting an end to the cycle of intimidation. A few other residents who had been previously targeted by the false code violations came to express their appreciation. Within hours, the city dispatched honest inspectors to examine any pending demolition notices, promptly invalidating them all. Official statements from the mayor's office were swift, denouncing the bribery ring and emphasizing that the city would cooperate fully with the DOJ to prosecute those involved. The mayor personally apologized to the neighborhood for the chaos. She promised that no further demolitions would occur without thorough checks and public transparency. Mr. Wagner, the outgoing HOA chair, was visibly shaken by the day's events. He admitted he'd suspected Karen might be overstepping her bounds, but he never imagined it was on this grand a scale. Over a quiet cup of coffee the next morning, he confided that he felt guilty for not reining her in sooner. I reassured him that Karen had a talent for manipulating people. No one saw the full picture until it was nearly too late, I said. But the dust was now settling. The threat to my home, and indeed the entire neighborhood, was neutralized. The excavation equipment was hauled away, the black sedan towed for evidence, and the forging ring that had thrived on bribes and intimidation was dismantled. From this point on, the matter moved into the legal arena, where the entire weight of the justice system would bear down on Karen and her allies. The indictment against Karen, formally listed as Andrea Whitmore, was swift and damning. Alongside her, the gray-haired contractor, revealed as a mid-level city official named Ronald Green, and 2 building inspectors faced charges of conspiracy, bribery, fraud, and abuse of power. Over the next few weeks, federal prosecutors added more counts as further evidence emerged. Bank records showing large, unexplained deposits to Karen's account, text messages discussing fees for demolition approvals, and statements from frightened residents who had been coerced into paying hush money. Karen's attorney attempted to argue that she was duped by the city officials, claiming she genuinely believed certain homes posed safety hazards. But that defense crumbled when phone recordings surfaced, secretly captured by cooperating witnesses, where Karen explicitly demanded a cut of bribe money or threatened to have city inspectors condemn homes if her demands weren't met. Coupled with Ms. Delgado's testimony about sliding cash under Karen's door and the forcibly discovered forged demolition permits, the prosecution's case looked ironclad. The news cycle latched onto the scandal with a voracious appetite. HOA vice chair orchestrates illegal demolitions, and city contractors collude in demolition bribery scheme. Residents across the state expressed outrage that a suburban homeowners association could become a front for such blatant corruption. Political figures scrambled to distance themselves from anyone implicated. Throughout all of this, I maintained my professional composure, focusing on ensuring that each piece of evidence was properly cataloged and that the local district attorney's office had every resource they needed to present a strong case. While I was a key witness, especially because Karen specifically targeted my property, I ensured that the legal team handled the prosecution to avoid any conflict of interest. My role was to deliver the evidence I'd gathered and provide testimony if necessary. Behind bars, Karen's once defiant demeanor reportedly gave way to desperate pleas for leniency. She had no sense of accountability for the immense harm she caused. Instead, she blamed everyone else, claiming the city staff had tricked her, or the HOA forced her hand, or I had set her up from the start. None of it changed the fact that she had been caught red-handed, forging government documents and bribing officials to destroy private homes. Even the local judge, known for his measured rulings, expressed disgust at the brazen nature of her crimes. It's rare, he noted in a preliminary hearing, to see this level of organized deception under the guise of community improvement. Ms. Whitmore stands accused of betraying not only the public trust, but also the neighbors she was meant to serve. Karen's sentencing hearing loomed on the horizon, promising to be a grim finale for her and her co-conspirators. But in Clearwood Grove itself, people felt a new lightness. Uncertainty about the future, yes, but relieved that the oppressive regime was over. The short-term chaos would soon give way to a reformed HOA and a renewed sense of community, free from Karen's reign of terror. With Karen gone, the remaining HOA board members convened an emergency session to address the aftermath. Mr. Wagner, though nearing the end of his term, spearheaded efforts to revise outdated bylaws, introduce transparency measures, and appoint an interim vice chair who had the community's trust. They recognized the urgent need to restore faith in the HOA. They voted to overturn many of Karen's draconian proposals, like mandatory fence uniformity and the reckless structural improvements. The board also promised to issue refunds for any questionable fines that Karen had imposed. In a public statement delivered on the steps of the local library, Mr. Wagner apologized to the neighborhood. "We allowed Ms. Whitmore to assume far too much power. This association will never again function without strong checks and balances." Around this time, I received heartfelt thanks from families who had been too scared to speak up before. The Melbournes left a plate of homemade cookies on my porch with a note that read, "For our hero neighbor, thank you." Ms. Delgado, too, found relief now that her hush money demands were no longer hanging over her head. I was touched by their gratitude, though my duty had been clear from the start. I despise corruption, whether it thrives in high government offices or in the smallest suburban HOAs. Meanwhile, City Hall underwent its own purge. Several officials were fired or resigned after evidence linked them to the bribery scheme. The mayor formed a new oversight committee to review demolition orders, ensuring no house could be condemned without a legitimate, transparent process. The Department of Zoning declared that it would implement an online public portal for all permits and inspections, letting homeowners verify any claims themselves. For Clearwood Grove, it was a season of renewal. Yard signs went up, supporting each other in small but meaningful ways, organizing block parties, cooking for neighbors. The oppressive hush that Karen had imposed lifted, replaced by friendly chatter and a sense that the community would bounce back stronger. Indeed, people seemed kinder, more cooperative, as though they'd learned a hard lesson about letting a single, power-hungry individual dominate them. I found it ironic that, in her ambition to turn Clearwood Grove into a world-class neighborhood, Karen had nearly destroyed its sense of unity. But in the end, her downfall sparked a rebirth of genuine solidarity. Perhaps that was the silver lining. However, there was one final act in this drama: the sentencing hearing, where the gavel would officially bring Karen's story to a close and deliver a resounding message that no one, no matter how petty or self-important, was above the law. Karen's trial proceeded at a steady clip, thanks to the mountain of evidence. The district attorney's office laid out the conspiracy in painstaking detail. They showed the financial links between Karen and the city officials, shell accounts, unexplained cash deposits, and text messages referencing special deals. Ms. Delgado took the stand, testifying how Karen explicitly threatened her porch with condemnation if she didn't pay. Another neighbor recounted overhearing Karen boast about having the city in her back pocket. Despite the overwhelming case, Karen, ever arrogant, put on a brazen defense when called to testify. She blamed the system, portrayed herself as a victim of manipulative city staff, and insisted she only wanted to beautify and protect the neighborhood. Yet the prosecutor deftly dismantled her arguments, confronting her with audio clips where she demanded bribes in exchange for halting demolition threats. I was called as a key witness one afternoon. The court fell silent when I took the stand, as the defense tried to paint me as a meddling neighbor with a vendetta. But when the prosecutor guided me through my credentials, chief of anti-corruption enforcement with a record of high-profile convictions, and asked me to explain how the sting was organized, the jury was riveted. I recounted the series of forged notices, the threats, and the final confrontation with the demolition crew. Exhibit after exhibit displayed my thorough documentation, along with sworn affidavits from my investigative team. Karen's defense wilted. The final nail in the coffin came when an FBI forensics specialist testified about the phone records. They had retrieved text messages Karen thought she'd deleted. One in particular read, "Need to get rid of Morgan's house. $5,000 if you can push the condemnation." Another $5,000 once bulldozed. No mistakes. That alone obliterated any remaining credibility in her self-defense claims. When closing arguments ended, the jury only deliberated for a few hours before returning their verdict: guilty on counts of bribery, conspiracy, insurance fraud, extortion, and more. The judge, a stern man known for tough sentences in corruption cases, seemed outraged by the scale of Karen's betrayal to her community. Standing to receive her verdict in a packed courtroom, Karen trembled. Gone was the imperious posture. She was pale, disheveled, clutching her lawyer's arm as the judge pronounced the sentence. The punishment was severe: multiple years in state prison, plus hefty restitution fines to reimburse the homeowners she'd intimidated and in order to forfeit her personal assets gained through the scheme. When they led her away in handcuffs, Karen glanced my way one last time. Her expression flickered between disbelief and fury, as though she still couldn't comprehend how her suburban empire had collapsed. In that moment, I felt a strange mixture of pity and satisfaction. She had chosen her fate the instant she decided to weaponize the law for personal gain. With the court verdict handed down, law enforcement wasted no time seizing Karen's property. Her grand two-story home in Clearwood Grove was locked under a seizure order. Eventually, it would be auctioned to help pay the victims she had extorted, as well as cover legal fees and fines. City officials implicated in her network faced their own penalties. Some cooperated for reduced sentences, but none escaped without job termination or criminal records. The day the locks changed on Karen's door, a hush fell over the cul-de-sac. Neighbors watched as uniformed officers carried out boxes of files, personal items, and anything that might be used to repay restitution. I spotted Ms. Delgado standing on her porch, silently observing. At one point, I walked over and gave her a gentle nod. She squeezed my hand, tears glistening in her eyes, but said nothing. The final chapter of her fear, at least, was over. Within a week, the for sale sign appeared on Karen's lawn, a stark symbol of how absolute power in an HOA can crumble overnight when that power is corrupted. Some residents whispered about what kind of person would move into the infamous Karen house, but mostly, people were just relieved that Clearwood Grove could move on. Legally, my job was done, but from time to time, I still assisted the local DA in tying up loose ends, ensuring no stone was left unturned. We discovered additional bribe attempts that Karen and her cohorts had orchestrated in nearby neighborhoods, though none as extensive as in Clearwood Grove. Those leads helped the DOJ prosecute more officials, sending a powerful message. No matter how trivial or local seeming the corruption, it would face the same swift justice as high-level cases. That message resonated. Anti-corruption hotlines received more calls from other neighborhoods, reporting suspicious building permits or code enforcement anomalies. Reform, albeit slowly, was spreading. People realized they had a voice, that they didn't have to submit to threats and extortion, even if the threat was just an HOA official or a low-level city inspector. In that sense, Karen's downfall carried a broader significance. She served as a cautionary tale for anyone who thought they could manipulate official power for personal gain. The system wasn't perfect, but it was robust enough and staffed by enough dedicated people to expose wrongdoing eventually. As winter approached, Clearwood Grove glowed with holiday lights strung across roofs and hedges. The new interim HOA board, under Mr. Wagner's guidance until a special election, strove to mend fences, both literally and figuratively. They encouraged residents to express their opinions on neighborhood matters without fear of retribution, and they organized volunteer groups to help with yard work or minor home repairs for those in need. I continued living in my craftsman house, which remained in pristine condition despite Karen's best efforts to have it bulldozed. My involvement in the sting inevitably became public knowledge, and a few neighbors confessed they felt uneasy at first, knowing they had an anti-corruption chief on their street. But the climate of fear that Karen had created was gone, replaced by a cautious optimism. A small group of neighbors proposed forming a neighborhood watch committee, not for petty HOA policing, but to keep an eye out for genuine safety issues and suspicious activity. They invited me to attend the first meeting, though I politely declined a leadership role. I wanted the community to stand on its own, free from any official overshadowing. At the meeting, Ms. Delgado tearfully shared how the neighbors' support had helped her stand up to Karen's extortion. The Melbournes offered free fence painting services to anyone who needed it, as a gesture of unity. Someone else suggested organizing a neighborhood barbecue to heal any lingering tensions and celebrate a new chapter. That sense of rebuilding and communal bonding was something Karen, in her quest for absolute control, had never understood. True community thrives on trust, cooperation, and empathy, not intimidation and exploitation. Ironically, her attempt to impose her will had galvanized Clearwood Grove into a stronger, more unified neighborhood than before. Months later, Karen's prison sentence was well underway. News outlets occasionally ran follow-up stories about her appeals, all of which were swiftly denied. The shadow of her corruption ring still lingered in distant corners of city governance, but each new revelation led to more house cleaning. The mayor, eager to restore public confidence, enacted reforms to streamline permit processes, reduce the power of any one individual in code enforcement, and strengthen whistleblower protections. Back in Clearwood Grove, a hush fell on the house that once belonged to Karen. It sat empty for a few months, then sold at auction to a young couple hoping to start a family. They'd heard of the neighborhood's dramatic history but weren't deterred. If anything, they saw it as a sign that the community was vigilant about wrongdoing. Their arrival was met with warm welcomes and open invitations. I, too, found new peace in my home. Late one spring afternoon, I relaxed on my porch, sipping lemonade and watching as kids pedaled their bikes down the street. The sense of normalcy was almost surreal, considering how close we'd come to having my house torn down in an illicit scheme. But that's how justice works sometimes, quietly restoring life to a better state than before, after confronting a crisis head-on. Occasionally, curious friends or co-workers would ask me if I regretted living in a place that had become a crime scene. I always shook my head. Clearwood Grove was, at its heart, a good neighborhood filled with decent people, just temporarily under the thrall of someone who exploited the system. By exposing Karen and holding her accountable, we reaffirmed the principles of law and community that undergird society. It was, in its own way, the best outcome possible. In the end, Karen learned that no amount of bribe money or official posturing can hold up against the rule of law and the resolve of those determined to defend it. Her attempts to demolish my home backfired spectacularly, landing her behind bars and forcing the city to confront the rot within its bureaucracy. Meanwhile, Clearwood Grove moved on, stronger than ever. We discovered that true neighborliness isn't about micromanaging other people's shrubs or fences. It's about caring for each other's well-being and having the integrity to do what's right, even when it's difficult. And so the final legacy of HOA Karen, the woman who thought she could bulldoze her way to control, was that she awakened the very spirit of honesty and unity she sought to destroy.